Huntress side. But once again, when I put my business owner hat on, this is the kind of technologies that help me sleep at night. When we have been brought in on some exposures, whether it's some ransomware events and some exposures, this technology has been key for us helping to support some of these customers that have come to us. This has been that go-to product that has really helped us remediate that and help that customer get back on the right path. So Ethan, Chris, thank you guys for this conversation today.
Hey, yeah,
Yeah,
thanks, Brian.
happy to be here. And here, I'll share my screen there. Chris, you wanna? So, everybody, Chris, you can see my screen, right? How
Yeah,
Huntress
I
SIEM
can.
simplifies cybersecurity. That means our audience can. So
Okay.
let's do some introductions. Chris, I'm gonna kick it to you to start.
Nice. So, hey, my name's Chris Watson. Get the absolute privilege to lead the security practice here at Choice Solutions, where we have our professional services, as Brian mentioned. I don't want to rehash all the stuff he did, but really excited to show how we can offer some managed security solutions. I see some of our existing customers already on, so good to see you all again, and hopefully we can help you out with this. Ethan.
Uh, and so I'm Ethan Tancredi. I am a technical account manager at Huntress. Been with the company about 3 years. And what I really love is the opportunity to get with partners like Choice Solutions and talk to their prospects, their clients about cybersecurity and the steps you need to be thinking about. Because unfortunately, like cybersecurity is not a destination. Chris, you probably talk to this all the time, but it is a journey that keeps evolving. Like you will never get to s secure nirvana. Like there's always going to be a next thing. And Huntress empowers me to have these conversations with people like you, Chris. So this is like some of the best parts of my day.
Awesome.
Definitely. All right, so let's
Well,
kind of dive into the content, what we are talking about today. So, like, what is a sim? And maybe I don't know if we want to throw a poll in here or just ask people maybe in the Q&A. I don't know if we have the chat going to that they can
we do.
respond in, but can does anybody have compliance needs or has even heard of sim? Like,
Mm,
you know, how
where are my HIPAA folks at?
do they though you have hippo folks? No, sorry.
Not us.
Uh,
Now you said SIM or SIEM, and I've
well,
heard both.
I'm a sim, but there's also seam. So like I'm not going to go fight. That is not a hill I need to go die on, is what I will say. Um, there are some people where it is important, like GIF or GIF, as an animated thing.
Right.
But the key thing is like, what is it? It's this it it collects logs. Like it's an acronym, security information event management, it shows, but the key part is understanding that it is really this ability to grab logs from multiple platforms. And Chris, you want to talk why that comes important into something like HIPAA or maybe other some of the other compliance frameworks?
Yeah, absolutely. So, just using going back to HIPAA as an example, there's a requirement that there is centralized logging. This is one of those, they talk about required versus addressed. That one, they're pretty boom. You got to have it. And what ends up happening is when you have logs in different places. So you have firewall logs, you have Windows event logs, you have uh, I don't know, access control logs, people badging into your office. What ends up happening is each of these logs may capture a single event that by itself, not a terrible thing. Ethan walks into the office, uh, that's not a big deal. He has a badge, he's allowed. But when I see that, Ethan's logging in from a country that I know Ethan's not in, or the time or lining up these things that there was a successful login, but there was also a connection from overseas that I may get from our firewalls. Putting those things together to get a more complete picture and getting all our logs in one place is the first part of that is to get that context.
Yeah. And really the key part about that is that getting that reporting right, where you're retrieving
Right.
data during an audit, or whether that is a compliance audit, right? Or during an incident. Like there's different parts of when you're going to need that. Um, And obviously, maybe this isn't obvious, like you need to understand how long you need to retain those security logs. So,
Right.
Huntress, in our solution, we have a couple different options. Our default is 1 year of keeping logs with what we call 30 days hot searchable, which means that you can go quickly into our platform, search in a 30-day period. We have an ability to do extended searches as well, but like that's our default. But there's also needs for longer retention, depending once again on compliance. Um, and I think this is where it becomes really important to be talking to your partner like Choice Solutions about what are your compliance needs, right? Because like compliance, just like security is not a destination, compliance is not a one size fits all, Chris, right? Do you want to talk a
Right.
little bit about that and how you
Yeah,
help navigate that?
absolutely. One of the things that we are really excited about at Choice is we're Choice Solutions. We're not here to just shovel a tool. We want to make sure that you have a solution that fits your operation, your vertical, and then any requirement, regulatory or compliance requirements that you may have. You may have an internal requirement that says, "Hey, we keep our records for 5 years or whatever that may be." So having that option and having that available is a big piece of that. But then again, the ability to scale. Um, a SIM has to be able to support either a large enterprise, but at the same time, can we also support the small and medium enterprise, which is where we are really excited to work. These are the folks who, I can't go out and I don't need the Lamborghini cost for my security, but I still have the same compliance requirements. I still have the same regulatory requirements as these Fortune 100 companies. How do I get that level of support? And that's where a tool like Huntress SIEM can come into play, is meeting that compliance need at your level, your scale.
And the other thing that really it comes for, and so that's, I totally agree with you that compliance is key. But the second part is like where it comes into the platform is actually in helping you respond earlier and sooner in the attack chain. So at Huntress, we have this concept we talk about an attack chain of where a threat actor gets into an environment. And in that chain of trying to respond, like minutes do matter. Like how quickly you can see something. If you're not aware of what Huntress is, we are a managed security platform. Part of it is we have a 24 by 7 SOC team who not only is looking at our EDR solution, data and our endpoint detection response, sorry for acronyms, but that security operations center, that team is looking at alerts coming in, and SIM becomes this other tool that helps them respond faster and gives them capabilities that without it they would be blind to. And so what we are seeing, one of the reasons Huntress decided to offer this as a product was that security outcomes are improved by adding SIM into a solution. So yes,
Right.
compliance might say, hey, you need this, Chris. But like this is where we'll talk about today more. Um,
Right. Super important to remember, compliance doesn't necessarily equal secure, and secure doesn't necessarily equal compliant.
what?
And
Hold
so how
on. Are
we
you sure about that?
I checked all the blocks, Ethan, and they still got in. I don't understand. Um, but just to re-highlight this, and I know you're about to hop off, is Ethan's absolutely right. We've actually gone into events with Huntress as a partner, and there was still a threat actor with hands-on keyboard in the environment. And so by having the SIM logs available, by having the EDR available, we're able to isolate that environment that much faster, and realizing that we're literally just trying to type faster than a threat actor at some point. So again, minutes matter, and that response, with the solution is a huge part of it.
No, definitely. And we will go through some use cases, some things we've seen in the wild as it. So like one of the key things we talked about, SIM keeps logs. Like eh, and you might be going, yeah, okay, so what does that matter? But like threat actors, and I don't know if you've seen this in any of the incidents you've dealt with, Chris, where they will go and clear the logs, right?
Yep.
Like they are so all right, this was my, Gemini generated AI of Hansel and Gretel in the woods. Um, but like what did Hansel do to try and defeat his wicked stepmother, lead him into the forest, right? He dropped breadcrumbs. And I would say Hansel and Gretel didn't have a SIEM because the breadcrumbs got eaten by the crows. Like, there's my analogy here. Um, and that is what we see happen. Like, we'll get an EDR detection, and we had one yesterday where our SOC team was like, we could see the threat actor doing bad things. We could isolate it, but we couldn't tell you how they got into the environment. We couldn't give you more information. We could just say bad thing happened because the threat actor was like, yeah, I'm going to go clear the event logs as soon as I land. Um, and that impacts how quickly you can get that person up and running, right, Chris?
Right.
At that point.
Right. Yeah,
Um,
I remember at a conference I was at recently where there's a, yeah, make sure you build a custom alert that lets you know if anybody's clearing PowerShell logs. And I said, that's great, and I'm glad we have that alert available to us. But isn't that a bit closing the barn? What is? I'm not from
yeah,
Kansas. Closing
exactly.
the barn door after the horses already got out, right?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Because you're like, oh, super. Um, and I've seen instances though where, because, and most SIMs are this way, where they are sending those logs offsite, so the threat actor isn't able to access them in some way. Um, and that's how our SIM, it grabs the logs locally, sends them offsite. Our SOC can review those logs, and if they have SIM there, and we had a large resort uh, location that somebody deployed us with EDR and SIM into. And there was a threat actor actively in that environment. They didn't realize it at the time. The threat actor was clearing the logs to hide where they were. But with SIM, our SOC was able to pivot over to those logs and say, oh, this is the address the threat actor is coming from. And we're able to identify a machine that this was. You've probably been to resorts, Chris, where, there are large complexes and computers get put in all sorts of weird places. And somebody put a
yep.
computer in a reception area, someplace that nobody had thought about. And that's where the threat actor had landed. And with SIM, we were able to say, hey, there's this machine called, I can't remember what it was called, but, XYZ. Do you have that on the network? And they were able to talk to the client and be like, oh yeah, that's over, in maintenance.
Oh
And,
no.
but SIM gave us that visibility. Otherwise, we would not have been able to say where the threat actor was coming from. So it's key on that. I mean, it's also key to involve your MSP like Choice Solutions early and help them in deployments and all sorts of things. Don't go buy a computer and throw it all in and be like, hey, it's good, right? Uh, we could have a whole conversation, I'm sure, about uh
Surprise.
yes, exactly. Surprise. All right. So let's move on though. So like, how about SIM with the SOC and EDR? Well, that becomes this really strong story of success. So we had an incident where one of our partners protected a doggy daycare center out in the Bay Area. And they had deployed EDR and SIM. And so what happened through that is that the threat actor, they compromised an administrator account via the VPN. So virtual private
Mm.
network. Chris, did you deploy any of these during 2020 for some reason? Did something happen where you had to suddenly put out VPNs like candy?
We saw a lot of that going out, and now we spent the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years playing a lot of whack-a-mole to plug up some of those tunnels that we set up in 2020.
Exactly. Like, I deployed a ton of this when I was on the MSP space because I was trying to get Sonic Wall VPNs out all the time. And now playing whack-a-mole, the threat actors have realized, oh, these are a nice juicy target, if you will, that they could come in. So this is one where they compromised an administrator account and logged in. Well, what happened on our side, we had SIM, so our SOC team was able to start to look. They're like, oh, well, that's interesting. We got reliablesite.net, fan favorite of your cyber criminals, have, logged into this network. Um, and we were able to start to say, oh, yeah, they're actually trying to get in regularly. So, SIM gives us that alert. we could see it. Then we could see that they started with that administrator account, but they pivoted to another account, AMR Ganister, as the user who did remote desktop onto a domain controller, right? And so that's not good. But one of the things that Huntress has developed are these detections around known bad host names.
Right.
Threat actors, surprisingly, are, don't always change their tactics. And so, like this particular machine name, we had seen previously in other partners' environments. And so we were able to detect, like, hey, that's weird. That machine has come back in. And that gave us another usage of SIEM, right? It becomes this other tripwire, if you will, thinking about it. And so EDR, we were able to pivot. This is the power of endpoint detection and response. You can start to see what users do. So they were, accessing files, they were enumerating the network, and then we saw them grabbing files, right? WinRAR, which is a file thing, they were trying to get scans, managers, company web, right? These are HR, right? All things that are scary, right? Because they were trying to snoop around. And when we saw all of this with the SIM alert, we were able to say, nope, we're isolating this whole thing. And somehow I'm supposed to have the wolf be the bad guy in this one, but the wolf seems happy. I don't know in my Chat GPT generated
I
image,
think
but
they get a bad name. They get a bad name.
they got a bad name. But it becomes this combination where you can, you know, all together get a you get a detection, you can start to move, and our team can do this whole isolation so that nobody is coming in at all. Because that administrator account, had we just isolated that one machine, that one domain controller, threat actor could have still come in through that VPN. But we were able to say, no, we can see in SIM where they are coming through, and we were able to lock them down from there. Anything you want to share around here, or just that maybe about people who talk to you about that they're too small to get attacked?
Oh, that's my favorite line. Is we're too small.
Yeah.
We don't need to do that. And then and unfortunately, and we do temper our response because we do love our clients and our prospects. And it's not that you're too small. You're just too small for a click or a headline. Um,
Yeah.
Small and medium sized businesses tend to be easy targets, just because there are resource constraints. There's kind of that thinking of, well, we're too small. If we just security by obscurity type of deal. If I just hide among the big dogs, they won't come after me. But what we're seeing is that the value of the data in some of these small firms, so think medical practices, financial advisors, um, grocery and retail, that don't necessarily maybe don't consider themselves a crown jewels, but at the same time, there's stuff that's important. Your organization and your customers that these threat actors still want access to, regardless of your size or your impact there.
Yeah, and that doggy daycare could totally have been somebody who thought, "Oh, I wasn't small enough," but thankfully their provider was like, "No, you do have things of value. You have W-2s, you have clients,
Right.
you have payroll, all of these types of things that are there." Yeah. So another way that Huntress and SIM is great is finding brute force attacks. So servers, devices get exposed for all sorts of reasons. A remote desktop server maybe is exposed because that's a way we used to try and help people get into the office, right? Well, there's still some of those out there. And when those devices are exposed through the firewall, the threat actors can scan the entire net, the entire internet. They have these tools to scan it to say, okay, what's there? And then they'll just do what's called a brute force attack. Just send authentications. Boom, boom, boom. Do any of these work? And like it's exposed, us sending you a note saying, hey, Chris, this exposed RDP server is getting brute force. You're going to be like, yeah, I know that. That's like, it's raining. Okay, I need my umbrella. There's not much you can do about it.
Right.
Um, but what you could do, what we do is we leverage our telemetry. And what happens at Huntress is that we go and say, hey, the this IP address is an address a threat actor is coming from, is actually trying to break into multiple accounts across many of our different partners. And so we can see that address being used in an attack. And if we suddenly see that succeed somewhere, we can raise our hand and say, oh, hold on. Now that is definitely very weird. Chris, none of your clients, none of your prospects should be trying to log into multiple servers, multiple devices. You know, like that's weird. Just saying.
Yeah, it is. It is. I did have a customer bring up one time, like, well, I have a password lockout or I have a lockout policy in place. So if they try too many times, they get locked out. Well, that works for usernames, but what we've seen is a shift in tactics well, I have a password that I'm pretty sure works. So if I cycle through all of your usernames, well, each username only gets dinged one time against the lockout policy. I can
Yep.
just keep going. And so having a SIM in place to track that type of activity and
It,
correlate it all is huge.
it's huge. And the threat actors are smart enough. They understand those lockouts. So you lock them out. They're like, oh, hold on, there's a lockout. We'll just slow down our attack. So,
Right.
like, because most of those lockouts have a reset after X amount of time. And they'll be like, well, I got plenty of time. Bandwidth to them, computing resources are relatively free. Anyways, the
Yep.
other thing, as a side note, like if you look at what we have on a screen share here, the account that was compromised was called Xerox. So, like,
Ooh.
just free piece of advice to your prospects is like, make sure your service accounts like a Xerox probably don't have ability to remote into other devices. Like, right? They should just be used for maybe scanning only. Um, if we're doing our Xerox or printing. Uh, yeah, and so like this is what would happen, and we are able to say, yeah, hey, this got in, they tried to get in, and we were able to do this hunt for it. Um, and then SIM is definitely faster. Like having a SIM, we know is reliably faster in getting results because of things like that brute force, because we could see them as soon as they landed. And, when a nonprofit is getting logged into from a machine with one of these bad host names, um, you know, we can isolate that machine as soon as it happens. Once again, this is one of those uh cases where they have a machine called a user info who is able to remote into an environment. Um, but this happened as soon as it happened, we were able to log them out. I will tell you that I have seen cases on our SOC team where they were like, oh, if SIM had been in this environment, we would have caught that threat actor 5 days earlier. Um,
Mm.
which is incredible. But it goes to the ecosystem of the criminal underworld that's there. And Chris, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about initial access brokers and how that whole part works and why SIM is
Yeah,
helpful in there.
I can touch on that real fast. Yeah, absolutely. Really, that this underworld has gotten really patient. They've taken some cues from organized crime in the more traditional sense, but they understand things like backup cycles. They understand your resiliency plans. They could be in the audience right now watching this presentation, but understanding that uh, I don't necessarily have to be the guy who exploits it. And so what we're seeing is initial access brokering becoming a more major issue where, um, listen, I'm just going to find a way in. And once I obtain these keys, either through compromising an individual in the organization to give me their credentials, or compromising them in any other way, and instead of me doing the break-in, I'm going to make my money by selling the keys to the house. And what we'll see is these sent out in large collections. We can find them, on the dark web, which again, a great job from the Huntress team and their threat research team that goes out onto the dark web, so I don't have to. But yeah, there's an entire business system there, and the best way for me to describe it, especially to business leaders, is these are folks who are competing for the same dollars that you're trying to collect. We've seen the level of sophistication in these organizations grow. They have recruiting programs, they have HR manuals, they have training. I saw one that was paying recruiting bonuses
Hmm.
out of Eastern Europe. So again, if you consider these folks an additional competitor in your business space, going after your dollars or the dollars that your clients could bring to you, it kind of changes and reframes the picture there.
Yeah. And it totally does reframe that picture because you do need to understand, and it's some of what we talked about earlier about this, why also those smaller businesses that become a target, right? That larger enterprises, a Fortune 500, Fortune 100, right? They have a large budget they can put towards their cybersecurity, um, and put that investment in. And so those threat actors who have commissions that they are supposed to, they have numbers and quotas they're supposed to hit. They're going to move down to those smaller businesses as well, who they are hoping won't have as much technology protecting them and would become that victim that they can monetize for, a quote unquote smaller amount. Maybe it's not $1 million, but you hit enough, singles in baseball, you're going to win a game. And that's what
Right.
they're trying to do. And that initial access broker is setting them up for all those singles. Definitely. Um, and so we've talked about how SIEM, is really effective of keeping logs. We've talked about how SIEM with EDR is effective kind of in kicking out a threat actor quickly, helping get to initial access and understanding how the threat actor got into the environment. We've talked about how things like brute forcing can be defeated with a SIEM and how SIEM is faster, when a nonprofit is in danger. But the next part I want to kind of pivot to is a tale of two incidents. We had a partner at Huntress who, the first case, they didn't have a SIM involved. They hadn't yet invested in that in their clients. And we're going to kind of talk through some of the ramifications of what that was like. Both successful in extent. So this one, they were supporting a nonprofit who supports women in need and didn't have a lot of budget and wasn't high on the lists of things to roll out for this particular MSP. But, an EDR detected, hey, we started to see some behaviors that were unusual in it. And our SOC sent over this report as a high. It wasn't critical, but we were like, all right, this is suspicious activity. But we didn't isolate a machine at first. And then what happened is roughly 10, 15 minutes later, we started to see more suspicious activity, right? So this is now the hunting of Huntress. And they start to go, oh, okay, we got some really weird things going on. We have people already peeing. We have people pinging machines. We have people running bat files. This is different, right? Something now is weird going on. And what we determined is that, oh, hold on, there is a compromised VPN. So that VPN, potentially that doesn't have MFA on it, was compromised. And that this user, L. Brown, was starting to move around in the environment, right? They came from this machine that we were able to pull logs. They hadn't cleared the logs off the endpoint, but we were able to pull those logs and say, oh, actually, February 25th, at roughly, 6 o'clock in the morning UTC time, they got on there. We talked about some of the enumeration, but then they pivoted to a Hyper-V server, which is the underlying server infrastructure in that environment. And they moved over to an RDS server. And we deployed mass isolation. We protected it. There wasn't a ransomware or loss of data, but this particular client, um, had to call their cyber insurance company. They had to walk through what that process was. Incident response was brought in. And there was a 2 week of dealing with questions. What did they touch? What did L. Brown do? How did they come in? Well, we think L. Brown did this, but we don't have SIM, so we're not 100% certain. Partner rolled SIEM out to all of their clients at that point. Literally 2 days later, a fruit packing company, Huntress detected, credential dumping happening. The shipping account had logged in, and we saw that an admin came in from this IP address. We realized that actually it was part of the Fog ransomware group. Our SOC had SIEM. They were starting to say, all right, what can we look in SIEM? They started searching in SIEM and saying, all right, was it machine coming in as Cali? Was it this shipping one? Who's logging into this environment? And this is how a SOC with a SIEM becomes very powerful, because they can start to look at these things. They can pivot over to those VPN logs and go, oh, you know what? It's actually A. Romero who actually logged in and came in. And so we were able to send this alert out that says it was A. Romero, send that final report so that the partner knew it, brought in incident response, brought in cyber insurance. Within 24 hours, this fruit packing company was up and going again. And so that CEO of that fruit packing company didn't have to deal with insurance, didn't have to deal with all the questions. Chris, do you want to talk about that in the last couple minutes of what that's like?
Yeah, absolutely. For the business leaders on here, especially the finance folks, you know your number every day. And one of the things that we're trying to prevent is we do take a holistic look. We want to make sure that you're staying in business. We want to make sure that you're able to still put folks to work. We did have an incident with a partner that was a Huntress partner, a manufacturer. And, what does it take to get 155 folks back to work? At the same time, restore that revenue stream for you. That's where we go back to speed on basis matters. That downtime is calculable. Again, I can provide you the formula, but again, you know your numbers. And so how do we shorten that response time? How do we go from a 2-week headache dealing and love our insurance folks, but let's face it, they're in insurance. They're in the habit of, trying to minimize their risk as well.
Yep.
But, or, being able to restore yourself after, a day, getting the answers that much faster. Just being able to tell that full story.
Yeah. And so it really comes down to that protection that never sleeps. It becomes this holistic cycle is the key message, Chris, that you are talking about there, right? You monitor
Yep.
for active intrusions, SIM signals, alerts kick off. We can, pivot to that, use EDR, ITDR, we didn't even talk about for 365 identity. SOC investigates. Okay, we got adversaries. We can then take threat response, right? Isolate, provide guidance, give reports, get them back up and running. And it all is about how quickly you can get back up and running,
Right.
so that you're having that limited impact on your business as much as possible. It like my little ditty I put together to about this is like, the more Huntress sees, the faster we act. The faster Huntress acts, the less harm that gets done, right? And like
Yep.
that is the key. And SIM, for another analogy, we've talked about it, is it's think of it as a eye that is always seeing, right? So like that is if you that's the message, is like it will help you see things more and act faster. And that's what becomes key when you're dealing with an incident, so that you don't have to have that large amount of downtime as you're investigating and dealing with insurance and incident response, so that you can get back to business and earning money. And obviously, if it's not very clear, you need to have really good backup and recovery systems. You need to be talking to Choice Solutions about, um, how you are prepared for these things. So
Right.
I'm going to stop sharing, let Brian come on, give a couple quick words of farewell. But thank you, everybody, for letting me talk to you about SIM and how it can help improve your cybersecurity posture.
No,
Thanks, Ethan.
Ethan, Ethan, Chris, thank you guys so much for sharing. And to all the customers on here and prospects, if we hit on anything, like I said, we are often a $50 meeting maker to with the Amazon $50 gift card just for another 30 minutes. Like I said, if we hit on anything as far as reach back out in the survey and take a meeting, and whether it's Ethan, Chris, or a joint part of our teams, we can get on a call and what is Huntress? What could this mean for you and your organization? Because it really is, minutes do matter. Like I said, I've never seen a situation where it is so critical, and the great thing about Huntress too is that we have visibility and watch it as they're trying to pivot and flank, and we can quickly try to isolate. And so minutes do matter. So give us a chance, 30 minutes. We'll do a $50 meeting maker. Take the meeting. We can talk more what this means to you and your organization. So thank you for your time. We appreciate your partnership and we wish you best. Have a great day.
Bye bye.